Hello, I'm John Locke. I'm a principal of Freelock. We're a Drupal development shop and really focus on DevOps based in Seattle. So that's why I like to talk about it. What I was going to talk about today is first off, why, what is the need for a DevOps approach to running websites? Then a bit about what DevOps is and what it means and how we think about it. And then using Drupal as the context for all of this, what tools we use to kind of use DevOps, put it into practice in our organization. And the context being a shop that partners with 30 plus customers to maintain their sites on an ongoing basis. So that's kind of where we're starting from. DevOps, I think, is really it comes out of Agile methodology. The term was coined 5 or 6 years ago. Basically bringing in development and operations, putting it together. We'll get into that in a little bit. But it's really important to think about why. And so we'll start out with, okay, what happens the day that you have a new Drupal site that launches? We're not going to go much into anything specific about Drupal, so I hope I'm not disappointing anybody here. This is just the context for the rest of the DevOps discussion. So, you're a new customer or a new site that you've just launched into the wild. You've got a Drupal site going. It's party time. Everybody celebrate. We have done it. We've made this big project go live. Invested lots of blood, sweat, and tears. It almost never is quite exactly what people wanted at the outset because generally their wish list is a lot bigger than their budgets in a lot of cases, and a lot of times you reach the point where it's just not quite what you wanted, but you're happy anyway. You're going to celebrate because it's a major milestone, it's a big deal. And it is. So what happens the day after your new Drupal site launches? Well, that's when, oops. No. What we see from a lot of other web companies in general is a tendency to want to ship the project, launch it, and walk away. And so that opens up a big hole in the market because there's always stuff to do after the site launches. In my opinion, the launch of the website is one day. It's going to need to be maintained, cared for, updated, security monitored, everything else for the rest of its life. So the start of the website is just a single day. What happens the next day? So this is where the operations side of things come in. Once the site is built, you've got a lot of things to think about. So what happens for the customer when they say, oh, the site seems slow. Doesn't have everything we need. I thought of something new, but that was out of the scope, so it's not happening. And Drupalgeddon, anybody that was working in Drupal a year and a half ago, major security vulnerability that basically was exploited within a day. And if you didn't have your sites patched, then you were likely compromised. We've picked up at least 7 or 8 customers who were exploited with that, and cleaned up their sites and gained new customers who now appreciate the need for ongoing operations. So how do we fix this? So these are the questions that I think people really need to be thinking about on an ongoing day-to-day basis. How do we know the site works? How do we know it works after I make this change? Okay, now we're getting into a cycle where we want to develop some things that we didn't get initially, but we want to do them now. How do we know that's not going to break something else? How do we know it's still working? Over the weekend, somebody hacks in, or some hardware fails, or who knows what. How do you know? And how do you know it'll work for us? How do you know that once, now that you have your site, that the user stories you identified that they built around, now that they're live, do people actually do those? And how do you decide how to proceed from there? So And then on top of that, the security side of things. So this is stuff that I just mentioned. Some of the risks that you're facing. There's attacks, there's the cost of upgrades. This is getting a whole lot better with Drupal 8. I really think that going forward, that's not so much a Drupal issue as it has been in the past. But getting to Drupal 8 still is you're at least rebuilding a theme. There's still a lot of work involved. It's a lot more than just running a site. Reliable hosting, maintenance, hardware failure, loss of bandwidth, the service provider. There's lots of things that come across that you just sort of scratch your head. So many groups and organizations don't necessarily have a sense of what is involved in keeping their site up and running. So we've had more than one that had the person with the Amazon credentials leave, and over the weekend their website gets shut down because Amazon's been trying to tell them to pay their bill, the credit card's expired, and nobody even got the message. So, there's also things like a few years ago there was a fire in a major data center in Texas, and in spite of all the backup systems that were in that data center, the fire department wouldn't let them start up the servers. So if you didn't have a copy of your data somewhere off-site, you were down for 2 months, or if you could rebuild it off-site. So you've got to be thinking about backup and disaster recovery. These are the operational sides of that. Then down at the bottom, project risk, developers who fail to deliver. That's something that happens when projects get big. Healthcare.gov is, I don't see how that could have possibly succeeded the first time out. There's no way when you make it that big a project. So one of the big focuses of DevOps is make those projects as tiny as possible. Let's just do the bare minimum. We'll roll out the next step, and we're just always in development. We're never done. The opportunity cost of falling behind. Now there's mobile phones. It sounds like right now we're on the verge of a lot of voice interfaces. Can your site handle that? If you don't do that and your competitors do, where does that leave you as a business? So these are some things that kind of really lend itself to us to say that a website should really not be done as a project so much as done as a continuous state of development. So the website is never done. What you need to do is get the most value that you can as quickly as you can, get things launched early, and then work on your user stories of what you're going to roll out next. That's kind of the framework that sets the context for DevOps. So what is it? I grabbed this off of Wikipedia, I think. I don't recall exactly where. But it's really the intersection between these three basic disciplines of technology. There's obviously development in there. That's writing the software in the first place. QA is really a big part. And like a lot of agile methodologies, in my opinion, what makes for a successful DevOps operation is putting quality first. Technology operations is the day-to-day framework that puts all this together. So in the way that I think about it a lot like rock climbing. Does anybody rock climb in the room? A couple. Well, the idea with rock climbing is you use protection as you go up. So if you fall down, you have a rope to catch you. If you're leading, you've got to place protection as you go so that you never have very far to fall. And that's kind of one of the things I think about. QA is your protection. The tests that you can run are the things that will keep you from falling and splatting on the ground. So a lot of this sort of stuff is just some qualities that we're looking for. When we get to Drupal in specific, we're using some test frameworks to try and run these. We haven't actually used red test yet, but that's one of the things that's on our radar as being a tool for integration testings. We are using Behat. Behat and behavior-driven design puts the user story first. So when you're developing new functionality, you write it in terms of what the user is trying to accomplish, And specifically, what do they do? What's their goal? Who are they? What's their goal? What do they do to complete this? I want to buy a pair of sneakers on the website. I go to the website, I type in search into the search box, and I hit enter, and I see text that says such and such, my sneakers. That's one user story. Another one will have the browsing. If you write those in a specific syntax, Behat will run it for you and look for text labels on the page. It'll fill out forms for you. It's a fantastic tool. We really like it. Screenshot comparisons. This is now called, I've just run across this, visual regression testing. This is kind of all the rage in the last year or two. We wrote our own tool several years ago that we've been using for quite a while that would just take and stitch two screenshots side by side. So it'd have a stage copy and a production copy and be able to look at them. Well, now a lot of people have taken that further and done pixel by pixel differences of the images. And Wraith is one of the tools that we've started using now. So it gives you a heat map of everywhere that's changed on the actual page, and it'll run it at multiple browser widths and give you a percentage of the pixels that have changed, and you can have a threshold for what passes or fails.
I was
Yes.
chatting with Rick about that the other day, and he was saying they were having some trouble with rendering fonts being quite different because of the anti-aliasing. Does Wraith handle that fairly well?
I don't know about that issue. I mean, I think there is a fuzziness factor you can plug in. But you can set your threshold for what's considered pass and fail. And we haven't gotten into it yet, though we do have a need for being able to black out certain areas, like the add part of the page that's always different. That's always going to trigger a big chunk of pixels that are different. But you can quickly see if that's what it is and pass or fail based on that. Red tests we were looking at is for some of the business rules, verifying that the people who should have access to a feature have it, and those who should not don't, and also that numbers add up correctly in different scenarios. But the behavior-driven design tools can do that really well. They're a little bit more wordy because you have to spell everything out a little bit more in plain text. So the development side of things, we really have gone whole hog on this basic approach. Everything's driven by the user stories. Starting out with exactly who are the users, what are their goals, what are they trying to do, and then we'll put 1 or 2 user stories in a sprint, and we'll develop all the functionality around that user story, along with the tests to go with it. And then the data that goes along with it, workflows and actions, all these sort of come out of the user stories. If we are writing a module that we can do some unit testing on, that's when it gets written. We'll also, the user stories are great for user training because now you already got the script that you can turn into what you expect the users to do. And if there's any exceptions that need to be made, it kind of puts it front and center for the owner of the project to say, okay, well, that's okay, except in this situation, I need to do that. Okay, great. We have a new user story now that we need to cover. And those can be turned into tours in the new Drupal 8 tour module as well. And we haven't done a lot of that yet, but we're excited about it.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. The operations. This is the part where I think we are doing a lot of fun, special stuff. This is stuff that gets me really excited. It's also the stuff that we're, for all that we've done, we've got a long ways to go. So we're kind of broken this into different areas: deployment, monitoring, backups, configuration management, and review. Deployment, we don't do things on production sites. We always start out in dev, push things up to staging, and then once we're kind of have tested the deployment to staging, we have some confidence in what's necessary to make it go live on production. The Drupal 8 config management stuff is a huge improvement in this. Most of our tooling is still built to handle Drupal 7 with features, and we still end up having to write out the tasks that need to be done, because we've got 2 Drupal 8 sites right now, and the rest are all Drupal 7 or Drupal 6 sites that we're in the process of getting into a Drupal 8 upgrade. And so with that, we're using, this is kind of a list of the technology that we're using. I'll get a little bit more into that next when we turn a little more technical. Monitoring is how you know that it keeps on, how do you know that it's up? How do you know that it's working? You've got to have something that's checking the website, making sure it's alive, making sure it's taking responses, that your server hasn't gone down. And then the backup systems. This is your disaster recovery. This is kind of the biggest piece of protection you've got for a lot of those risks you face as owners of anything that's online. There's the current trend in security attacks right now. I'm sure you've all heard of all the ransomware that's getting installed. If you have solid backups, you don't care about ransomware. You can recover really easily. And it's astonishing to me how many places don't, but it's such a critical thing that is really where we start. Configuration management is important for a couple of things. One of them is for being able to detect if you have a problem, if the state of the server has changed and someone's gotten in and done anything with it. It's also for deploying new sites, new servers. It's kind of the base layer that we put everything in. And then review. This is something that we do when we're going into a new project or a new account, more or less. I mean, almost all of our work comes from sites that other people have built. We're always excited when we get to build a new site, but we've focused so much on DevOps that probably 80 or 90% of the sites we manage, someone else built. So we go through these things whenever we're taking in a new site. We'll do the site audit tool that I know Pantheon, I think, is a big part of developing that. Hacked modules, go and evaluate what came from Drupal, the contributed upstream and Drupal.org, and compare it with what it said is installed on the disk, and then we can tell if somebody has hacked it, for killing kittens reasons or maliciously or whatever. Expiration dates, like I said, our clients aren't paying that much attention, so we've found a lot of people appreciate it when we let them know when their SSL cert's going to expire before it does, and when their registration's about up. Backup verification, that's one of the first things we'll do, is ask where are the backups, how do we get at these, and when we get them on a maintenance plan, we are actually verifying that that's happening. We're checking to see that the database dumps are happening nightly. Every month or so we'll go and see that any snapshots they're running on the server is working, and ask them if they're backing up to a local location. We'll look for signs that that's successful as well. Performance, in this case, performance in talking about web responsiveness, how long does it take to get a page loaded, and scaling is generally the focus in the Drupal world. How many requests can you get per second on your server? But there's definitely a feel to it as well that we're looking at as well. And dashboards and checklists are really a key part of that as well. So that's kind of an overview of a lot of the systems and how we see DevOps. For the rest of this, we'll get a little bit more into the weeds of what we're actually using internally and what we're working on and what we're developing. So we're taking a DevOps mindset to our own internal process. Basically, here's where we are today, here's where we'd like to go to, here's the next priority for us to do. And that's the way we think about this all across the board. So it's in a lot of ways, it's really kind of a mindset here. So I was going to go over some of the tools that we're using in a different organization than the one you just saw. We're managing servers, containers in those servers, and Drupal sites, actually on the servers too. We just use containers to serve them up, typically. So kind of our crucial one that we're using across all of our network is Salt. There are a bunch of others in this space. We landed on Salt because at the time we were doing this part of it, it seemed to be the most approachable for what we were trying to do. We needed to pull a user account off of 30 different servers, and within 15 minutes of downloading this, I had done it. Yes?
Can you explain a little what that is?
So this is a configuration management system. The Puppet, Chef, Ansible's come out since we started using Salt. Those are the ones you hear about mostly now. They all do really similar things. There's an older one called CF Engine that I think Salt Stack took more of the pattern of CF Engine and updated it. It's built on Python, and the idea of states. So with Ansible, you have runbooks that are kind of scripts that will execute a particular sequence of actions. With states, you define the states that a machine should have, and it will do the Salt modules will do all the work to make the machine fit that state. So rather than applying a run book, you basically say, here's the state, go apply it. I really like the way this operates. So it has a collection, actually, let me back up. States, pillar, mine, reactor. This is how it happens to organize these things. So states are the configuration, the state will define the configuration for a web server, and the configuration for a set of dev tools, and a configuration for your templates, more or less, that you're going to use. Pillar is where you can put in the machine-specific details. So you can store keys in there. Every one of your clients that Salt manages gets all the states, so you don't want to put anything sensitive in there. I mean, we're managing customer servers with this. We don't want them to have our keys or anything. So the keys, passwords, all that stuff goes in Pillar. States is kind of the template that gets those merged into it for each particular machine. And then mine is a way of collecting data across all the machines. So we'll use that to get SSH keys that we then distribute to all the machines. So now we don't have to accept the host key anytime we connect to a new machine. If Salt's updated it, it's already there. Reactor is a kind of an event trigger thing. So we can send an event through the reactor that will cause Salt to redistribute stuff. So we're doing that for a lot of system-wide config files. The states themselves, they'll have a top file. It's all YAML, so everything's YAML these days. I love it. The top file, these define targets, and you can do them by roles. You can do them by a mix of roles, and the I in the Docker containers is actually pulls out of the pillar. The G pulls out of machine-specific generated data from the client, so you can target particular OS versions and with different rules and everything. Then from there, this is a state file here that basically says, okay, so DNS mask. So what we do on our machines, we set this up. Now Docker has its own built-in DNS system running on each host so the containers can see each other. We built this one before they had that available, so we ran DNS mask with a shell script that every 10 seconds or so will look for any new containers and update a tiny local DNS mask server. So this is essentially the config for that, for distributing that script everywhere, for hooking it up to an init script, various things like that. And then here is where we are generating actual Docker containers from a config file that would be in our pillar. So generally we will have a container for Nginx, we'll have a container for PHP FPM, If the site really has some security needs, we can run different versions of PHP in FPM containers all on the same machine. Our dev machine's now running PHP 5.2, 5.3, 5.6, and 7.0. And we can access any of the sites with any of those PHP versions just by changing the DNS name that we're using in the browser. And so this is how we get the containers out. This is the template that we use. You can see the double braces for values that get plugged in from Pillar. And so some Pillar files, they also have a top file that basically says, okay, it's the same basic structure, it's just this data is only sent to the targets that match in the top file. And a similar YAML file for the actual data. So we've got one set that will have the servers, and we'll list, okay, what sites are on this server, what containers are we going to run, what are the where is it going to go to for MySQL? It could be in another container on this box, it could be in RDS, it could be another dedicated host. What deviates from our pattern for monitoring that we want to specially hook up to make sure that we're actually getting our monitoring system populated with the new site. And then here's sort of the equivalent for the individual sites, and we'll just basically have in the pillar, okay, the freelock.com site, here's our config, and then when we run salt on this, if I were to move this to another container and run salt high state, I don't have to do anything other than that on the new machine, and it will clone our Git repo for freelock onto that machine, hook up Nginx, hook it up to a container, have everything ready to go. It'll even write the config file, the settings.php, we have a settings.production.php that will include for the environment, and that will already have the database credentials in it. So all we need to do is import the database and copy over the assets, and we're live on the new site, a new server. Yeah, and actually that's the site one. What was this one? Oh, this is the containers. That was the containers that we have. So we can do one container per site, or a lot of times we'll do a container on the server and throw several sites into it and just mount them in the directory. So then there's the monitoring part of this. So we've used Isinga for a long time. We used Nagios a little bit before then, CheckMK, and we had some RRD stuff. One of the new tools we just started using is Prometheus, and really like that. And I've got a sample of it running. Which window is that? Here we go. So this is actually using Grafana as a front end to Prometheus. And this is live right now, showing some graphs of TCP connections, and you can see spiked loads on particular servers and all sorts of stuff that you can get, and you can add these on the fly. Prometheus has a node exporter that's just outputting counters from the system all the time, and then in Grafana you can graph what you care about from the Prometheus data. So that's one of our new favorite tools. ANAG is an Android app that'll talk to Isinga. Prometheus also has an alerter that we haven't yet hooked up, so you can actually dial in your alerts around trends and stuff like that you care about, rather than just single things that are firing. So that's on our list to improve basic view of Isinga and what we're just looking at. Docker is a big deal for containers. So how we use Docker is we haven't really, so that is actually next up is setting up some test environments so that we can run our testing tools in Docker containers. We're using it in production, and we're using it to deploy the various systems that we need, whether it's MariaDB or our other monitoring tools. We're using it wherever we can to just sort of encapsulate everything. And if you haven't looked at Docker, The great thing that it adds to containers is a really consistent way to create an image. So a Docker file is a really simple script that will create an image, and then you can just Docker build the image, and you'll get a nice image that's consistent every time, except that it will get any updates in there. So if you clear the cache on the build cache, you can basically regenerate the Docker image, and then we run our own internal registry that all of the machines will pull down via salt and get updates. So once we update a Docker image and it seems good to go, we will put it in our central repo, and the servers will update themselves over the next 24 hours. Do I have anything else on that? Yeah, so Docker registry, that's another, it's something that the Docker distributes, so you can have your own private registry and you can do whatever you want with your containers then. And then we get to the sites themselves, and this is where we're doing a lot of the really crucial stuff now. Gitolite is what we've been using for years for our central Git repo. There's GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub, all sorts of other places you can do it. We're huge fans of owning our own infrastructure, so I really don't like using hosted infrastructure because I'll do it for AWS, I'll do it for the bare machines, but I want it to be portable. I want to be able to move to another service without having to redo anything. So we like hosting our own. GitLab definitely looks really intriguing these days and seems to have a lot of good features. So if we're starting today, we might use that. Gitolite's a really simple, it actually runs as an SSH daemon that talks, Git behind the scenes, and we can hook into it super easily. So that will trigger our Jenkins build. It'll trigger a salt reactor. So in this case, Jenkins is doing our deployment to stage once we push a release build. And it will pull a fresh database off of production and the updated code and merge it in and run all the update scripts and basically let us know when it's done. The salt reactor, we have drush aliases in a Git repo, and we also have configs for our visual regression testing that we have on all our dev machines. So when we push those into Gitolite, it triggers a salt, distributes all of our keys and everything through salt, or all those configs. So now we can run our dev tools locally. Matrix is, has anybody using Matrix or heard of it? Matrix is, I think, the coolest thing that, well, a lot of this is really cool. Matrix is basically a new version of IRC, except it's all web-based. It's based on just HTTP and JSON. It's a bunch of people that used to do a lot of SIP services. So they have a telephony background, and they tried making XMPP work for them and got frustrated at how fragmented the market was and said, okay, we need a strong, full spec that is not going to fragment like XMPP. And they've been developing it. It's a federated system, so we run our own Matrix server. And anyone can, and then matrix.org has a big one that bridges all of Freenode on IRC, so I'm using it for most of my IRC now. A really nice Android and iOS app. So it's a chat system, and it's based, it's a lot like Slack in its appearance, but one of the nice things about it is that you can put arbitrary state in it. So they describe it as an eventually consistent JSON database store. And so we actually are posting our own state into it, and we created a bot that I call Watney that will basically look for the state in the room, and it is now orchestrating all of the other actions that we do in our system. So we are posting messages to kind of a system room, a deployment room. Right now, Gitolite is doing that. We haven't hooked up our other systems quite yet, but that's the goal, is to dump all the information into one room. And then Watney has keys that it can go out and do all the deployments for us, and then we have one place that we need to pay attention to. Okay, who's allowed to trigger this, and can focus our security on the bot, because none of the things posting into this room have any power to do anything. Jenkins we've been using for deployment. We developed a script to do a lot of that, and what we found is that it's really challenging when you have 30 different sites, and there's always exceptions. We need to run some jobs on some the database is too big to copy in from production, so we don't do that. Too many variations for Jenkins, and really not into Java, and just a whole host of reasons. We were still planning to develop on it, and then I ran into Concourse. I'd actually heard of another one recently that led me to think, I've never heard of that one. What else is out there? And the name of the one that someone pointed me at escapes me, but it's like an open source version of Travis. And so I searched around, and I looked at a whole bunch of them, and Concourse jumped out at me as being really nice architecture for what we're doing. You just define these little jobs that have an input and an output, and the output of one job can be the input of another job. And so you end up with the ability to string together long pipelines right there in Concourse. So this is, right now, we're just starting to play around with it. We can basically put in a pipeline per project on the one side, and then within a pipeline we can have different groups. So we can have the tasks related to deployment, the tasks related to tests, and basically anything that you define in here. There's resources and tasks, and it does everything back in Docker containers. So that's the other reason we really liked it, is that now we can build up a testing tools container and hook it up here, and when a git commit comes in on a certain branch, it can trigger the database copy. We can have rules around whether to do that or not. If everything succeeds, then it can kick off the tests and just run those. And it will show you, so here's one that I found that's a lot busier than ours. And earlier today, this one actually had a job running. I think it's finished now. But you can see from the different states here that it's a graphical display, and you can see instantly where something is failing, what's actually currently running, and drill down from there into what you need to do. So in this case, we can go in and see, and you've got all the output from all the different things that it's doing, the resources at its source. It's a really slick tool, and I've done all the tutorials on it. I was hoping to have more time this week to actually build out something functional to actually demo, but I ended up having half an hour, and I put this together. So that's one of our favorites. So that's where we're going with kind of the test automation, and that's also got the ability. So this has a binary that can trigger the jobs, and so that's something that's pretty easy then for us to give our Watney bot the credentials and have it create the jobs. We'll go into our chat room and say, run this job, and it could install the pipeline for us and have it all up to date and kick it off if it's not already there. And so I already kind of mentioned the actual testing tools we're using. Wraith, let me see, I didn't have that up in a window. So Wraith essentially outputs stuff that looks like this. I think it's just the window's too narrow. When you click into there it is, there it goes. Okay, so with this narrow window, And it looks like when I ran it right now, it did not actually have wasn't able to reach the dev server. The problem with doing these live. But it'll show you basically a dev, a production, and a diff. It can also be run on historical snapshots, so you can basically point it at, save a directory full of snapshots and compare it against the next run. So really, really useful things in that. Behat we've discussed briefly, we've discussed before, and then red test is something we're interested in, but right now we're focused on the other tool, getting those. So the key takeaways: the launch of the site's one day. The site should last for the long haul. It's not a question of how much it costs, how much should you spend, and where it's making sure you're spending that where it generates the most value. So that's really the message that we give to our clients when we're going into this is, I can't tell you how much it costs, but how much is this worth to your organization? Where's the real value? Where does it make sense to spend the money? Is this a priority? If it is, then spend money on it and get something that's really gonna help and work for you. And recognize that your wish list is probably always going to be longer than what you can actually do. So you've got to prioritize it and try and deliver stuff that actually will work now. So that's really what I see as the core philosophy of DevOps. It's an ongoing process, and it really aligns dev and operations with the business goals for the organization that's doing it. So that's basically what I had prepared, with 5 minutes left for questions. Who has questions?
Kind of just generally, you've talked about, we're using this tool now, and we're might start migrating with that tool. Just kind of generally speaking, how easy or hard have you found it to kind of swap out some of these tools and processes and such in your DevOps infrastructure?
Well, there's always a big cost to switching.
Mm-hmm.
So my attitude is only switch if there is some compelling reason that is going to more than make it worth investing that cost. So the ones we've done have actually been pretty easy, but part of that's because we're still building out our processes. Our bug tracking system right now is an Open Atrium install, which is on Drupal 6 that we're still using. And as much as we'd love to get something newer, and we're dabbling with these others, we've been playing around with one called Taiga that's a lot more suited to the user-oriented flows that we actually develop in now. It's a lot nicer to organize that. Everything has to go back to the old system because that's our source of truth for it all. So yeah, switching's a hard deal, and we're planning to switch that out in the next few months, but it's below some of these other projects in our priority. I do think documentation is a big part of that as well, keeping good records of what you're doing. So if anyone's interested, that's one of the things we have Watney doing is release notes for us. If anyone wanted to see that live and how we have that. What was your question?
Yeah, can you speak a little bit to the details of Drupal specifically and how you've used containers? Like, for example, configuration management, how do you inject that into containers, and how do you talk to a database backend?
Yeah.
That infrastructure?
So what we will put on most of our production hosts is DNS mask and postfix that are running outside the container, and Drush. So that brings in PHP. And then we download the Drupal tree into the same place we always have, var www.html and then a site name. And we just manage that on the host itself. And then the container will bind mount that web root as its web root, more or less. Both the Nginx container and the PHP FPM container. And so we can use Drush to still get in and manage everything. That is one thing that the DNS mask approach does that Docker's DNS won't do. So we haven't seen a reason to change that. And then inside the containers, they can see all the other containers by DNS name. So in Nginx, we just say, okay, this is the freelock www container for this config, and we generate that config in Salt. So yeah, so it's a simple YAML config for each site, and then what we built kind of takes care of the rest, but that's the basic approach. Yeah.
Can you give any advice? I find myself rewriting a lot of the automation stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any experience in preventing having to rewrite your deployment scripts?
Well, like what sort of things are you ending up rewriting, and why?
Yeah, just simple deployment stuff. You have this whatever the to do, you run it, and now we're working with Drupal 8, and suddenly I have to rewrite half of the code to make it happen.
Yeah, Drupal 8 breaks everything and makes it easier. That's part of what we're doing. That's why we're struggling with Jenkins so much. That's what's led to us switching to Concourse, is that we can break those into much smaller units, and then we can commit the config for, okay, which one of these jobs do I need? We can commit right with the project. And so the continuous integration can get its instructions from the Git project where the site lives, and we'll also put in our test configs there too. For this is a list of URLs to go check for regression. So it's just breaking it up into smaller pieces. The whole Unix idea of small pieces loosely joined. But that's my answer. That's our answer.
How often do you have to, or how do you disseminate knowledge of your stack to your developers? And do they ever run into issues where they get stuck or have to reach out for help?
Yeah, always.
Okay.
We have really gone to chat a lot. So in a lot of cases, anybody want to see our bot in action?
Kind of.
So in here's Watney in there. So basically we have all our developers in a room per project, and anything needs to happen or they have any questions, that's where it goes. This is searchable. We can go back all the way to the beginning of the history and find notes. We can permalink those and point people at it. It's communication stuff. It's always a challenge, and I think Matrix really helps us for that a lot. But yeah, it's just that. So what we've got here is a release. Okay, so we have a release that's done. If I want to actually create a new release, I can release create, and Botany will come back with a new release created. And so this is really helpful for the Drupal 7 side of things. Okay, step deploy.
Did that just create a Git branch or something?
It just created some state in this room, is all it did.
Okay.
And so git create, I can do it better this way. So I've added a release step, release date +1 or in 1 minute. So it's now going to remind me in 1 minute that it's time to go. Release note. This is a demo. And then, so one of the things that we're going to have this do is, so right now we just take and do a git log one line, pretty one line, and paste it right into a release commit note here, and we end up with basically a nicely formatted set of release notes that has everything that we had on there, and a release. So status. So once we've tested it, we can move it to stage. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we'll have then is have it go and populate the commits, populate the cases out of our case management system. When we get ready to roll a release, then we've got basically one spot where I can export it in Markdown, and right now we're cutting and pasting that right into our thing. And there's my reminder saying the release time is reached. So yeah, that'll be the other next thing too, is actually post this on the log for the site in Atrium, so that we've got that ongoing record when we actually do push things out to production. And this really gives us, so with our Git strategy, we're tagging every release, and with tags combined with matching notes in there, we found that to be a huge help whenever we need to roll anything back. We were having trouble with one site that we put together a view and pushed out to a client on Acquia, and the view ended up with a sub-select, and what we eventually found out was the database still had my ISAM tables in it, and this view was taking 45 seconds to run, and it killed their entire site performance. And we didn't know what was wrong at the time, and the client was frustrated, and we couldn't actually do anything in there because the site was so unresponsive. And we had done several deployments trying to fix it. We were able to then go back through our notes and say, okay, here's the last good one, check out this code, reapply those features, and while the client was on the phone, we were back up and running in the previous version. So, having some discipline and placing that protection as you go, this is another technique that we're using. And any more questions, or do we have the room till 3:30, or are we over? Okay.
Yeah,
The 4:30. So we got time if anybody has any further questions, or we definitely have a lot of things that I can show more if you're interested, and if not, thanks a lot for coming, and hope you found it worthwhile.